Well, welcome to my vintage Estes rocket build. This will be the Estes Der Red Max. I tend to build these old rocket kits. I don't build too many clones. I do buy some of the new ones, especially since Estes has really stepped up their game and they come out with a lot of new rockets. Also, I do build other older kits such as the Centauri rockets. I'll build them straight out of the package. Really have no reason to keep them in their package. They're just going to sit there, so might as well build them like they were intended to be built and fly them. So we'll see what's in this, but the kit looks pretty good. Not been opened, so we'll go ahead and open it. Kind of working around my camera here, so bear with me as I try to open this thing up. Okay, so nice rocket tube, much thicker than the rocket tubes of today. Engine mount tube. Nice big parachute. Oh, fins are coming out, but this is old balsa, old die crushed balsa. See that? Not the laser cut stuff we have today. It's some old balsa. Have to fill that and I'll go over that. What else do we have? Plastic nose cone, not much has changed on that. 18-inch shock cord. Yeah, pretty strong. I'll replace that with a new one. Yeah, the rest of the supplies all look pretty good in here. Let's see the decals. Looks like they had a little rip in it. So in the package, so when they taped it, they may have gotten the decal here a little. Let me see if I can free that. All right, so I got the nice decal sheet here. Decals look good. So what I'll do on the decals is, I'm not going to use them all. So I'll take one of the decals that I'm not going to use. I'll test it, put in some water, put it on old rocket tube, see if it falls apart or not. If it holds together, and believe it or not, a lot of these old decals hold together fairly well. I'll just use it straight off the sheet. If for some reason they fall apart, just not usable, then I'll go ahead and spray some Testors gloss coat. That seems to be the best for me. I know they have brush-on products from Microscale and other manufacturers, but I've had great luck with the Testors gloss coat for spraying it. So that's pretty much it. So yeah, like I said, everything looks good, definitely usable, should be a fun little build. Go over some real quick building supplies for these old vintage kits. My goal is just to build it out of the bag. I don't make any changes. I use the same traditional shock cord. I just put a new rubber shock cord in there. It's probably going to last longer than my rocket's going to last. Never had an issue with it. As far as glues go, I just use traditional Elmer's glue all. I do put it in this nice little bottle that I bought from Hobby Lobby. It has a pin applicator, a needle applicator, so it's really precise. More for my balsa wood models I use this for, but I also use it for my rocket. So I'll put this in here and just use this. Plus it has this little cap, keeps it from plugging up. So a really neat little bottle here, but you could use it straight out of here. Many different glues you can use. I know a lot of people use yellow glues. I personally don't like the yellow staining it does, but that's just a personal thing. They work just fine. I don't use any instant glues. Never really had a need for using instant glues when building a model rocket. Epoxy only if the instructions call for it. Like I said, I build it right out of the package. Make my rockets heavy. They're usually lighter than what the package weight is, so I've never had a fin pop off using Elmer's glue all. I have used this on large RC airplane balsa models and never have I had one fall apart. So it's going to do its job. Dries probably a little bit slower, dries nice and clear, and it does sand okay. So the next thing we want to talk about is the balsa. So these are pretty good fins, old die crushed fins here. They're in pretty good condition. They'll just require some sanding. Now, if you were to just build the rocket, you could sand these fins, sand them smooth, put a little bit of curvature on the leading and trailing edge only. You can sand it smooth and then try to paint it, but it's going to look horrible. It's going to soak in all the paint. The paint really isn't going to fill any of the grain. I mean, it's low pressurized can spray paint. It may have some fillers in it, but you're really going to have to put a lot of paint on there and a lot of sanding, a lot of time. And that's kind of what Estes instructions now say to do. Probably because it's harder to get balsa sealer down, much tougher than it used to be. But we'll go over that here in a moment. So basically now what they have you do is use a primer, like a filler primer such as this one. It's actually a great primer. I don't really use it too much on my rocket builds, but it is a good primer. They just have you spray paint the balsa, the rocket when it's all done. Of course, you have to let it dry, sand it, reapply, let it dry. And even with that, I guarantee you the wood's going to look horrible. The grain is going to soak up some of that paint. It's going to whiten the grain. You're going to get fuzzies you have to sand. So you're really not going to get a smooth finish like you would with a traditional balsa sealer. This is old Aeroglass sealer. I have bottles left. It's basically just dope, which is a lacquer that has some plasterizers in it. And this has a little bit of powder in it, as you can see here, the white powder. That's not really to fill the grain. That's more to assist with sanding. They have that in hardware sanding sealers too. They'll put like this soap additive. It's a powder, and that just helps with sanding. That's all that does. But the dope itself, like I said, it's a lacquer with a plasterizer, so it will seal the balsa so it doesn't soak in the paint. There are balsa filler coats. They don't make this any longer. Aeroglass used to make it. As you could tell, you can probably see there, there's a lot more filler product in there. That was made to fill the grain. I didn't really like it. It took a long time to dry before you could sand it. There's other products people use for a sealer, which I highly recommend. You can use water-based sealer. This is one they use for, I guess, pine cars. I saw this at the hobby store, picked it up, just tried it. It works pretty good. I mean, it has no smell. You can use it indoors. It does its job of sealing the balsa, so you apply a minimum of 2 coats. And if you want to paint, your balsa is going to be smooth. You'll still have grain showing, but it won't be as profound and it won't be rough. But the more coats you apply, it starts to fill the grain. And if you want a grain-free balsa finish, just apply more coats. Also, you can still buy dope products. This is Super Coat. It's once again just regular dope with plasterizers. There's no sanding agent in it, but it still sands really well. I use it on my RC airplanes. But you could just brush this on the balsa wood too. It's going to seal it, and that way it accepts the paint. Once again, any sealer, a minimum of 2 coats. More would be preferable if you really want to fill the grain. SIG also sells a sanding sealer. This is really thick stuff. They have a lot of filler. As you can see, it's pretty much the same as the Midwest filler, just a lot more filler product in it. About 2 to 3 coats of this, and you're not going to have any grain. It's their filler with their light coat dope. So it does take a while to dry before you could paint it. Sand it. Not quite as long as it would take to primer. If you were to do primer only, such as that spray can primer, you're going to have to let it dry a lot longer than you would if you use dope. Not only that, you got primer all over the rocket, so now you got to prime and sand the entire rocket. Where sanding sealer, I just put that on the balsa parts, and makes for a lot less sanding, a lot easier sanding. Like I said, if you don't want to use stinky dope products, I understand. You could definitely go with a water-based sanding sealer. I know a lot of people use wood fillers. This is a wood filler that my wife uses for her woodworking. This stuff works okay. If you put it on bare balsa, it's not really sealing the balsa, it coats the balsa wood. And the idea there is that you sand it nice and smooth, but you don't go all the way down to the balsa wood. Because if you go down to the balsa wood, you have raw balsa, and you got to apply more, repeat the process. A lot of people use it, but it does add up a lot of weight, so you kind of have to be careful with it. But you get a nice looking rocket. Once again, you don't have the smell. You can use it indoors. It makes a heck of a mess though when you go to sand it, so just beware of that. And since it is a water product, a lot of people thin it down with water, brush it on, kind of consistency of toothpaste, brush it on. Just be careful, because a fin like this, especially if it's not attached to the body tube, will warp on you, so you got to do it on both sides. Let it dry, sand it. You have to repeat a couple times to make sure that it's nice and smooth. Continuing, so for sanding, I like to use sanding blocks. You can use a wooden block. This is an old Great Plains little block. I have bigger ones. I was lucky, I bought a bunch of them before they went out of business, but I think Semrock now makes their own, so you could probably buy theirs. And then I just have different grades of sandpaper here, all the way from 250 up to, let's see, what do I have? I have 800 grit right there, and really good. Keeps the fin nice and flat when you're sanding it, keeps everything flat. So that way you're not getting valleys into the balsa wood. It makes it so much easier to sand. Foam sanding blocks also work pretty well. You can see I just stuck some sanding paper on there, wrote the different grits. That works pretty good too. It's just a sponge sanding sealer. The only other things I would be using would be, of course, a hobby knife, regular tester's hobby knife, a pencil, paintbrush for the balsa sealer. I really like this thing. This is a tube marking guide from Estes. Had it for quite a while now. Sure beats using the door jamb, especially in our house. They tend to build it crooked, so that didn't really work out well for me. And spray paint, once again, you have your primer. I don't usually use primer. But if you use a primer, get a nice sandable one, let it dry overnight, sand it smooth, and apply your paints. For paint, there's many paints out there, and you really need to read the instructions on the can. This is an old tester spray paint I have. This works good. It's enamel based, but you're only going to be able to put on a coat or two before you have to let it dry, and I think this one's 48 or 72 hours before you can recoat it. If you try to recoat it before that, you're going to start having your paint react. It's going to crinkle up because it's off-gassing. You have to sand it back, just more work. Like I said, I don't really use primers, but if I were to use an enamel paint, I would definitely use a primer first. Enamel paints, just these days, they've changed the formula so many times, they just don't stick that well. But the most important thing about enamel paints is read the instructions. Read the instructions on when you can add your second coat. They take a long time to dry. What I use is the traditional paints that we probably all grew up with when we started model rocketry. Krylon. This is an acrylic lacquer. You can see it dries in 12 minutes. Not only that, you can recoat this anytime you want. You're not going to have any issues, but you need to stick with this. You cannot put this over enamel. Once again, you'll get the crinkling effect. So you can put enamel over Krylon, but not the other way around. Unfortunately, the only way to get this is through online, or I have a Granger store. I can go there and get it. But that's it. You're not going to find it at your local Walmart or your hardware store. They pretty much, the EPA pretty much squashed that. But if you can find it, definitely the best paint out there. It's not as glossy as enamels. It never has been. I would call it more of a semi-gloss type paint. And for this model, the Red Max, I know the instructions call for a white base paint. So I'll put the white on. This is the new label that Krylon uses. Followed by the red for the rest of the rocket. And black. So that's pretty much everything that I use to build these old vintage kits. My goal is to just build them out of the bag. Like I said, I'm not here to make a display model. These will fly. So I'm not going to do much to it other than just build what the directions say. I try to keep them light. That way I never have issues with the rocket crashing or not performing as advertised. Never had an issue using Elmer's glue all, but that's because I do build light. And never had a problem, never had a need to use epoxies or anything else. I know people also put paper on the fins. Trust me, I've tried everything, just like everybody else out there has. I've always come back to regular dope-based sanding sealers. It's easiest, fastest, gives me the best results. It's going to seal the wood so it accepts the paint, doesn't absorb the paint, hides most of the grain, and that's all I care about. I'm not into filling the body tubes or any of that. I just want to build the rocket, make it look nice, and fly it. Keep it simple, right? So I'll clean up my mess here, and we'll get started on the balsa wood. All right, so the next step here would be to prep the fins. I start this before I do any other part of the build. You have to sand them. No matter how you choose to finish it, you got to sand the fins. So if you can, try and keep it inside the balsa wood that it came with. Like I said, this is die cut or die crushed, as you can see. So sometimes it's tough, especially with these vintage kits. The new laser cut kits are much easier. You can just put it in there and sand, and you're ready to go. And I'm not going to do much sanding in here because I'm inside the house is the best videoing that I can do. It's kind of hard to video out where I normally sand. So I'll at least show the techniques. Plus, pretty boring to watch me just sand and sand and sand. So I take my sanding block and just going to go nice and gently, letting the pressure and the grit of the sandpaper work for me. I'm not pushing down hard on it because balsa wood is soft and you will cause indentations. So I would do both sides, flip it over and do the other side. The other thing is when you're doing this, make sure that the surface you're doing on is clean of any debris or dry glue, because this is soft balsa and you will get indentations in the balsa wood if you sit it down then start putting pressure on it for sanding. So make sure you do it on something nice and smooth. I have a smaller cutting mat like this I keep in the garage only for sanding. I don't glue on it, I don't cut on it. It's just for sanding, and that way I'm able to keep my fins well protected. Same with the sandpaper. Sandpaper sometimes will start getting clots on it, especially when you start sanding the sealers or fillers or whatever you choose. Make sure to brush that off, the same as if you get primer on it. You really want it nice and smooth so it doesn't scratch and damage the balsa wood. So preparation's the key there. As you can see from the balsa, you see how you have the little nicks taken out of some of it? That happens with die crush. This isn't that bad. That could probably just fill when I go to glue it onto the body and I start doing the fillets. I could fill that little spot with Elmer's glue. That's not a big issue. Now, if it's bigger or like a corner's chunked out or something, you kind of have to make a decision. If the corner's kind of chunked out, it's not that big, maybe the fins get shaped a little differently. No big problem, but you got to do all the fins the same. Or the other thing you can do is just cut a piece of the balsa wood here, glue it on the portion there, maybe cut a little more off so it's a nice clean cut. Glue that piece of wood on, let it dry, sand it nice and smooth, and that way you've fixed the fin. What you probably don't want to use is those water-based store-bought fillers that you get at Home Depot, because it's very brittle. Those fillers, well, you can use it to put on the balsa wood as a smooth top coat before you paint to kind of hide the grain. It's okay for that. It doesn't do very well at permanently sticking or being strong. And if you read the package, it tells you that. So when you're fixing your furniture, you're not going to just plug it in to a big area that's missing and expecting it to hold up. It would just, over time, just start to crumble. So that's the way you kind of have to deal with some of these die crushed balsa sheets. It's just the way it is. I mean, this is how we built for many years before the laser cut kits came out. We just dealt with it, we made it work, and hey, that's part of the hobby. That's part of the fun of building vintage kits for me sometimes. I have a lot of fun doing it. I prefer that over the laser cut wood, but that's me. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and sand both sides of this. I'll come back in and we will shape the balsa. So I went ahead and got the balsa wood sanded in the sheet, cut them out. That's the other thing, is if it's in the sheet and it doesn't just fall out, use a hobby knife and cut it out. Don't try to force it, because you'll splinter it or break the wood, and then you have to deal with that. So it's pretty much all nice and smooth. The next thing will be to make sure they're all nice and even. What I do is stack them. Try and pick an edge that's even. As you can see, die cut fins were notorious for not all being the same. So that's where they would have a show on the plans like a piece of sandpaper, and you go back and forth and sand it. Keep looking at it, make sure you're sanding it nice and square, not off to an angle. Or just hold it like I do, and I'll just start sanding it so that it's nice and square. Once again, checking it, moving on. Once again, I'm not going to do that inside here because I can't get sawdust all over our house, but that's just what I'm going to do in the garage right now. I'll go out there and just start sanding it so they're all the same shape and size, and then I'll go ahead and come back and show how I do the leading and trailing edge. So I have the fins all sanded. Looks like a block now. They're all the same size. They're smooth. So the next thing we want to do is round that leading edge. We want to get that nice and round, and same with the trailing edge. So I'm going to try and do this on camera a little bit to kind of show you basically how I do it, but I'm going to have to once again go outside. So basically I start and just roll the block just to get it started. It's all I'm trying to do. Get it going, do it on both sides, keeping it nice and easy. The pressure is even from here to here. Try not to go off to the side, because you'll take off too much on one edge. You see it getting fuzzy. That's old balsa wood there. It's old dry balsa wood, ready for the balsa sealer. So I'm going to do that until I get the shape that I want. Once I get the shape I want, I keep looking from the from the root edge into the end edge, looking, seeing if it's getting where I want it. Once it starts getting rounded, then I start just going back and forth, rolling over just like that. Once again, I'll look. Right now I have a lot more sanding to do, but just giving you the basic techniques. Once I get the rounded edge I want, I'm happy. Sometimes I'll have to make little changes. That's where a little piece of folded up sandpaper will come into handy to try and help you make sure that that's nice and rounded and it's even. Not a long process, pretty quick. As much as I build model rockets and balsa wood airplanes, and maybe sometime during this video I'll take my camera up to my hobby room. I'm starting to pack it up because we're moving, but I'll show you how many airplanes and rockets I built. I'm not a big sander. I try to avoid it, but there's just, you can't. When you're building RC airplanes, rubber-powered airplanes, balsa wood rockets, you're going to have to sand. I just try not to sand too much, meaning that it's why I don't go and apply multiple coats of primer, because then that's a lot of sanding. So I choose not to do that, or put any of the commercial made wood fillers slather all over the balsa and the body tubes, because I have to sand all that. I don't want to do that. So I try to make my life easy, still have a nice product, but at the end of the day, the kit's built. It's not sloppy, it's built, it's going to fly, it's going to serve its purpose, and I get through the hundreds of kits I still have to build. I mean, I really wish I could just glue on the fins, glue the rocket together, throw some paint on, and it'll look somewhat decent, but trust me, I tried that. It's pretty horrible looking if you try to build like that. The balsa's got to be the hardest thing to paint. I think a lot of the models that Estes built back in the days, they're show models that they would take on the road with them, or probably even for some of the catalogs, they probably use basswood fins. I seriously doubt those models that we see on the covers were built with balsa wood. It's just, you're never going to get a perfect finish with balsa wood, even if you use paper. I've tried papering. It works great, but if you're going to go through all that process, you might as well just go with basswood. It's light, cuts easy, well, somewhat easy, sands super smooth, and you could seal that with one coat of seal or just prime it, and that's always going to come out smooth. So just my 2 cents. I think I've only built one rocket with basswood. I think that's it, and it was super easy. I'll never do it again because I got all these vintage rocket kits I want to build, and I'll just use the cruddy balsa that came with it. So I'm going to go back to the garage, finish doing the leading, trailing edges, round those off, and get it all ready for the sanding sealer. So I brushed on the first coat of sealer, let it dry for about an hour. You can see it's totally dry. Fins nice and flat still, no warp. I ended up putting these little metal sticks in there. I do too, so it's easier to hold and doesn't spin. I do that because I wanted to brush both sides. I'll start, let me get my brush. I'll start applying a couple strokes there, turn it over, a couple more, couple more, couple more. And what this does is it prevents the fin from actually warping, keeps it nice and flat, which is what you want. So next thing, I think I may have a little surface area here. It's nice and flat. No glue, there's a little glue blob there, but we're not going to touch that. So you want to go ahead and sand the fin. So I feel along here, it's rough, and this is what would happen if you just put paint on there and no sealer. That first coat would be rough. Opens up the grain. It just, like I say, it would look ugly. So once again, we'll just lightly sand the edges first, not much, just enough so it's smooth. Then the leading edge. You're not trying to change the shape of that edge, so be careful. Doesn't take much on the edges to sand it nice and even. This is probably about 320 grit right now. Nice and smooth, perfect. So now the next part is to sand this, because you got to get that the roughness off. So you just start let me adjust my camera here. So I want to start sanding it, and we're just going to lightly sand it, rotate the fin around, sand it some more, keep rotating it. You don't want to do one spot and start gouging it or getting an uneven fin. Kind of go with the grain. Doesn't take much. Anyway, you're just doing that till it's nice and smooth. Now there's two things you can do. The middle sometimes gets hard because balsa wood doesn't plane perfectly flat like a large board does. Even a large board doesn't. You have dips and valleys. Nothing predominant, but enough that you're not going to be able to get. So you could try a sponge sanding sealer like this, 320, and get any of the little spots that may need it. Or you get your little folded up piece of sanding paper and you get those spots that you couldn't get with the sanding block. Because you don't want to sit here and do too much sanding with that block, because once again, you're going to go right through the sanding sealer into the wood. You don't want to do that. So I'm going to go sand all three. I'm going to apply another coat, let it dry an hour, sand it, do one more coat, and then I'm done. Not so much the first coat, but usually what you do is you want to hold this up to the light. Obviously there's no light here, so that you can see. You're trying to look at the flatness, but you're also looking to make sure you don't have any bumps of sealer, which you shouldn't. If you're going in long strokes and smoothing it out, you may have to thin your sealer. The water-based sealer, not water-based, sorry, the acrylic sealers, the safe ones that you can buy at the craft stores and some of the hardware stores, it's easier to spread. It doesn't dry as quick as, let's say, the dope sealers. The dope sealers, you sit there and keep doing this, you're going to have lumps in there, and it's lifting up the previous coat, and it wants to grab, and you're going to have a real rough surface. So be careful, you don't want to do that. That's why you're brushing it on like you're painting. You want it nice and smooth, so that all you're doing is sanding out the roughness. You're going to put on another coat, sand that one, and it's just going to be nice and smooth, no bare balsa. And then by the time your third coat's done, you should be able to look at it in a light and look and see no imperfections after your final sanding. You're probably, after a third coat, you're going to see all the grain filled. It fills real quick and easy, and be ready to start building. The other thing I didn't discuss was, let's say you do have an indentation in the balsa. A lot of times you could just put a little bit of water on that spot, let it dry, it swells up, before you do the sealer, obviously. Before you do your first coat of sealer, and make sure all those indentations are gone. If it's really deep gouge, if that's not going to work with, that's when you want to use your wood fillers from the hardware store. You just thin them out with some water and brush it on that spot to make it even. Sand it with your sanding block so it's nice and even, and then proceed with sealing with the sealer. All right, I'm going to go ahead and finish this. I'll probably start working on the engine mount now, get that going. I'll post some video of that. Okay, so I cut out the shock cord mount, and now we have to glue the rubber shock cord into that mount. Before I glue that in and fold it, I kind of pre-fold it. I just put my ruler over the dotted lines, give it a nice little crease, fold it. That makes it much easier when I go to glue it. Same thing here. Voila. So that's what it's going to look like when it's all said and done. The crease is all done. Now it's ready. So when I go to glue it, we all pretty much know you kind of glue it at a little angle just like that. Fold it over. Gets glued one more time. Once again, it'll be at another angle. There, so it's nice and straight. And at this time, I'll put a little bend in it when it glue's drying. I'll let it get tacky and secure in there, but I don't let it fully dry because I want to put it inside the body tube. And when I put glue on the shock cord mount, I want to conform to the roundness of the tube. So it still needs to be wet. I still want the glue dry, wet, so that it conforms to it. And I just glue it in. On this one, I think it says 1.5 inches in is where I want to put it, and that's so I have room for the nose cone, so the shoulder of the nose cone doesn't hit the shock cord mount. So I'll mark it 1.5 inches in. It's a BT60, so I could put my ruler in there to mark it. If not, you could put the measurement on a pencil of how far to go into your body tube, mark it, and you can glue your shock cord in. So I'll go ahead and get that all glued up and do that next. So once again, the engine mount just needs to dry, but you can see where I put the fillets on both sides of the rings. That's just to hold it, reinforce it. But I do smooth it with my finger, just so it looks nice. You don't want it really rough, even though you're never going to see it. Well, you'll probably see this side, but you're never going to see it. But still, just that nice clean construction. tight glue joint, reinforcements that are smoothed out, no air pockets. It's not just slopped on there hoping for the best that it's going to retain inside the rocket once the engine deploys. So the more you do as far as a nice clean build and make sure your glue joints are nice and sound, the less glue you'll probably actually have to use. Once you start having sloppy joints and trying to correct them with more glue, that never works out very well. So anyway, I just wanted to show you that. I'm just going to let it dry. About 2 hours. It's Elmer's glue, so it doesn't dry very fast, but super strong. Like I said, don't let people fool you that you have to use epoxy, because I guarantee if this was nice and dry and I try and pull it apart, the paper is always going to give before that glue joint. I guarantee it. The paper's just going to rip. This is plenty strong. You're not going to have any issues. So I use my little guides here, marked the body tube, drew my lines. Yeah, not much to that. I showed you the device I used from Estes. I did the launch lug line. Now with the launch lug, they're 3/8 inches long, the launch lug. They're short. So I measure it out where I'm going to glue them, because I want to put the glue here, then set them down. Same with here. Glue, set it down. They tell me where to put them, and that's where I put them. So it makes it easier than trying to put the glue on the launch lug and, you know, try and fit it in. It's just easier to put it there first, then glue it on. The only other thing I do different is on the end here, where the body tube line is, I'll put a mark so I can see it. Because the fin, you'll be able to see the line, you'll be able to see the line once you put the fin on up here, but you're not going to be able to see it down there. So I just put a little mark here, and that way I can make sure that it's where I want it to be. So that's marking the body tube. So the engine mount is all dry, sturdy, and I got to be able to get it inside of here. Problem is, it's too big. I mean, this is a thick tube, and I don't want to force it in because, one, this is just cardboard. These will bend, and we don't want to bend them. So I don't want to force it. So what I'll do is I'll just take my sanding block and lightly sand it until I get a nice tight fit. I want it tight, but not to the point where it's bending the cardboard. So I'm going to go ahead and get that sanded. And then the next thing is I'll tell you to put the glue in. I'll use a extended Q-tip, a wooden Q-tip. Put the glue on that, put it in here 2 inches. And then in one motion, I'll slide this in till the plans say until the engine hook is even with the bottom. You have to just do it in one motion. So it's all you get. If you let it sit too long, it's going to grab and then you're stuck. So you want to put enough glue in that it's not going to dry. And that's a good thing about the good old Elmer's glue oil. It doesn't dry that fast. So you do have time to slide it in, get it in position, but you're not going to be able to mess with it too much. So make sure you're ready to go. Slide it in one motion. Double check the instructions. It tells you to make sure that it's even with the rear and that the engine hook lines up with the launch lug. So I'll go ahead and get that going. Okay, so the fins are all sealed. 3 coats. I don't know if you guys can tell, but you should be able to see that it is smooth, like plastic. They're nice and flat, no grain showing. I may not have a light. Of course, you can see how rough it is on that root edge. That's okay, because we'll get the glue in there. So they're nice and smooth. Now the next thing will be to glue them on the body tube. Once again, real easy. 3 coats of sealer, a little bit of sanding in between. That final sanding, I usually go up to 400 grit. The other 2 prior sandings will be 360. But that last sanding, I usually go a bit finer. I do have a little indentation on the fins. As I was setting up my camera here, I indented one of the fins. So I'll have to get that fixed. Just a little bit of filler and that's it. Okay, I'll get them glued on and we should be ready. Bye. Okay, so now we're ready to glue the fins on. The body tube's all marked up. Basically, I'll just go over the process here because I'll need to move the camera in order to do this. I gotta get a better setup. This is only my first time doing this. So basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my glue, my white Elmer's glue, and I'm gonna put the glue along the root edge here. You can see how porous and gouged out it is. That's okay, I put enough glue there. Then I'm gonna wipe it. Let it sit for about 30 seconds or so. Then I'm gonna apply another coat. Once I get that other coat on, I'm gonna attach it to the fin. So attaching it to the fin, or to the body tube, sorry about that. I'm gonna just glue it at the edge, using my finger to keep it even with the edge. I want that trailing edge against my finger and the end of the body tube, and it just goes right on that line till it's nice and even. Hold it there for a few seconds, and then I'll visualize it to make sure it's straight. And that's pretty much it. Pretty much just sits on there, and I'll put it on my Estes stand. I'll have that in here when it's drying and I take a picture so you'll see what stand I use. I let that dry a few minutes, and then I proceed with doing the other two fins. Once again, I put that little nick mark at the bottom here, right there, so that when I put the fin on, you'll be able to, I can see it when it covers up the line. So that's how I know it's straight on in the back as well. Let that dry, probably for a good 30 minutes, and then I will add the fillet. So I'll go ahead and get these glued on. Once again, there's not much to show with it. Just know that you want to try and get it lined up perfect the first time, because you start doing this with it, you're going to make a mess, have glue everywhere. So you really don't want to do that. So you're just going to put it down, make sure it's nice and straight, hold it. When it's dry, you want to set it down so that it dries nice and straight. So I glued the first fin on. You can see how the glue kind of oozes out as I glued it on. That's okay, that kind of makes the first little fillet for me. So I just leave that alone. I kind of smooth it out with my finger, but leave it. And now I'll set the rocket up so that it dries. Once again, so they're both glued on. The launch lugs are both glued on. I just looked at them along the line there to make sure they're straight. And they may not look straight in the video, but they are. You see everything lines up, and that's what we're looking for. Okay, so this will be the last part of the build before we paint. We add the fillets. I'm just using my normal little bottle here. I put a different tip on. It's a little bit wider, kind of helps, but you could go straight out of the bottle too if you wanted to when doing the fillets. The only thing special that I use is I do keep a towel that I have wet. This way I can wipe my finger when I get glue on it to keep glue off the rocket. You don't want any glue on the rocket that's not supposed to be there, because it's going to show up in the paint job. So you want to make sure it's clean, and you start that with clean techniques. So when I go to put the glue on for the fillet, I start at the tip of the leading edge and root edge of the fin, and I just go all the way down. Then I repeat it on this side, go all the way down. I'll get that on right now, but then I'll follow that up with just my finger, just smoothing it out. Give it one good pass, and that's it. I'll have to apply this real quick and then show you. Okay, so you see I put the glue on. Now I'm just going to use my finger, my pinky finger, and smooth it out. After each pass, I wipe my finger on my towel so it's nice and clean. I smooth that out so it looks nice and even, and I'll do it on the other side. So you can see I have the fillet, the first one in. It's all nice and clean, no glue on the rocket. You'll see it gets a little bit on the edge of the fin, and then before we paint it tomorrow, I'll sand that smooth so it blends into the fin and you don't see that line. Then you just want to let it sit and dry. Not very long. I give it about a couple minutes and then I repeat the other 3 fins. So as you can see, that's the first light coat of white, gloss white. It just let it dry for about 10-15 minutes and then I'll put on one more light coat. You can still see the wood patterns showing through because it's such a light coat of white paint. But we'll do one more light coat, let that dry, and then proceed with the gloss red. You can see the coupler I put into the rear. The stick goes into the engine mount tube, and I put the coupler in so I don't get paint in there. But yeah, I mean, looking pretty good. I mean, once again, no grain showing after just 3 coats. And once again, no primer. So I'll give it one more shot and then we'll do the gloss red. All right, so I got the last coat of white on gloss white. I'll let this dry a few minutes and then I'll hit the gloss red. You can see, I mean, the paint, no grain showing. Not bad for not having a primer. Like I said, it's not a heavy coat of gloss white because I'm trying to keep the weight down. I just wanted enough that when the red goes on, it stands out. So I'll probably just do 1 light coat of red, followed by 1 more, and then that will be done. Unfortunately, I do paint outside still, so once in a while I'll get a little fuzzy here and there that lands on the rocket. You know, there's only so much you can do when you paint outside and you don't control the environment. As long as it's nothing big or too obnoxious, a lot of times I'll leave it. I mean, you can't even see them. It's not like there's a lot. It'd be like one little piece. But a lot of times I can also remove that with just a paper towel. I'll just take a paper towel and lightly sand where that piece landed and go from there. So as you can see, she's all painted, just drying. She's dry to the touch right now, but I'll give it a good night before I apply the decals. So I'll do the decals tomorrow morning. You can see it came out pretty good. You can see the spirals, but I'm okay with that. You can see the balsa sealer works really well. It's why I like using it. The decals, not much to them. I will post them tomorrow once they're all put on. There's no technique. I already tested the one decal, went on perfect, so I'm just going to dip them in water for 15 to 20 seconds, and then I brush on the water to the model itself and kind of just float the decal on. There's no technique to it whatsoever. All I can tell you, with old decals, you're not going to be able to do much as far as repositioning them, so you need to make sure you get them on straight the first time. If not, you kind of just live with it because they will tear. Once again, I don't put anything on the decals. I've had bad luck with some of my vintage builds when I use some of the decal saving solutions. I have found that Tester's gloss coat or their decal bonder, if you can still find it, works really well. So I'll go ahead and let this dry tonight, and then tomorrow we'll get her all done. The only thing that will not get done tomorrow will be Dullcote. She looks good glossy, but I kind of want to make her look like the package and dull her up a bit with some of the Tester's Dullcote. Really good stuff. That's it for now. So I'm currently doing the decals. You can see how much water I put before putting the decal on. I just brush it on, and because the fins are so smooth, no grain, the water goes on, puddles up, and then I take my decal and I just slide it on. Then I just use a paper towel or my flat brush and kind of get the water out of the decal. So I'm almost done with the decals, and I'll have a picture or at least a video of the completed rocket here, hopefully in a little bit. As you can see, the decals are on. They're just gonna settle in overnight. They went on great. I mean, these are good quality old decals. Not like the ones Estes has today in most of their kits. If you build the new Dured Max today, the decals are very thin and stretchy, harder to deal with, and just not the same opaqueness. I mean, you can see from the vintage kit, the white skull, there's no red showing through at all. If you look at a new Estes decal from the Dured Max, you'll see it kind of turns a little pink. But yeah, as you can see, everything came out looking good. Decals came out looking good. The rocket looks pretty good. Trying to show you guys the spiral so you can see. I mean, you really have to get close. I have my camera right on this thing, and there's no primer, no filler, and I don't put my paint on that heavy, but you can see they're really hard to even see. Yeah, even if I enlarge it, it doesn't work. So, but yeah, the decals went on really nice. I put the decals on, went after the package look. So basically what you see on the package is what I have for decal placement. I did add a lot of the extra ones. This kit comes with a lot of decals, especially when it comes to the fins. I wanted to use them. So you can see I kind of placed them everywhere. Well, the ones that you can see. But no, she came out really nice. I'm really happy with it. Once again, that white decal is white. It's not pink like it is on the kit of today. So I'll pull out one of the new kits that I built. The other thing I noticed in the kit, I think today the kit comes with a thinner white body tube. This is a real sturdy body tube. But yeah, I mean, it came out pretty nice. Once again, not bad for 3 days of building. That's it, ready to fly. Secret is just, you know, make sure that you build clean. You don't get glue all over the place. That you seal the fins with something. Whatever your product is you like, seal the fins. It makes everything easier, especially when applying the decals. Now, the only thing I'm going to do, and I never add a top coat, like a clear coat or anything to any of my rockets. I'm just going to add the Dullcote, because looking at the package and in the catalog, it looks like their rocket is dull. So I'll probably add that. I still haven't quite decided. But yeah, I'll go grab one of my other Estes Dured Max kits, one of the new ones that I built, and show you the difference in the decals. And then we'll go ahead and weigh this. The package says should weigh 67 grams, and that's going to include the parachute, but not the wadding or the engine. So I need this to come under 67 grams. It feels really light, but I'll go grab one of the new kits and compare them. So the Red Max on the left is the reissue kit. I built that when it first came out, when Estes first released it. I want to believe I was building this one as a display for a hobby store. Ended up going out of business, so I don't remember if they displayed it or not, but it's really shiny. I did fill the spirals on this one. This one definitely took a little longer to build than this original out of the bag one. And sure, it'd be nice to build like this all the time, but it took a long time. The sealing of the balsa fin's pretty much the same, so that doesn't take long at all. But to do the primer on the body tube or add filler to the body tube, sanding, priming, sanding, priming, sanding, and then top coating, it takes a while. But you can see that they're pretty much the same. The one thing I wanted to show you was, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to tell you the truth. If you look at the white skull, it's kind of got a pink undertone to it because the red shines through. Actually, on this one, the original decal, it's not printed on that black wrap that you see. It's actually a raised decal on top of it. That's just how they put it together, but it's very solid white. You can't see any red under it as compared to this one. You can see that red undertone. Probably can't see it as good on the video here, but it's there. So like I said, I built this one out of the bag as a display back then. When it first came out in 2000, I think it was early to mid 2000, it did not come with the white decals. That came out later. So that's why it doesn't have it on the nose cone. And also for some reason, they had the inside where it says Red Max and some other decals, they had it white in there, maybe to show the little emblem better, but in the old version, it's clear. So anyway, that's kind of the comparison. I'll weigh them and show you the new one. The new version, I think, came out heavier, obviously, because I failed the spirals, and it also comes with a 1/4-inch shock cord, longer versus the old 1/8 one that came in the original kit. Same nose cone, other than it's solid black in the new kit, not white. The engine hook, it has the modern day Estes engine hook, but pretty much the same building principles when I built this one. Nothing changed. I just used balsa, good old dope-based balsa sealer on the fin, so all that grain is gone, because don't want any grain. And then I actually filled the spirals in the tube, which again, I was hoping to display it at the hobby store, maybe get some more people interested in the hobby, but I don't believe that ever happened. So, but this one, like I said, built out of a package, same thing, filled the fins, the balsa wood, made sure everything was smooth, and just put the paint directly on there. So I think that's about it. Also, the new kit comes with a really cool parachute. The skull that you see in the black wrap is printed on the parachute. So a really neat parachute. Nice kit. And I'm not condemning it at all, but I'll go ahead and weigh the one that I just built and see if we're at our weight limit. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and weigh it on the scale here. Once again, the package is showing 67 grams, and that's without the motor or wadding, but has the parachute in it. And this one is coming in at 60 grams. So pretty light. Like I say, it feels light when I pick it up, especially compared to this one, which will come in at, whoop, gotta get the stay first, 87 grams. So that's what you get for trying to make it look really nice by putting filler and more primer. I'm pretty sure it's probably a gray filler primer that I used. I don't really know if I filled the spirals with putty or not. I don't remember. Could have just been primer, sand, but it did take a while to build. But you see how much weight that adds. So not just the weight, but also the time it took for me to make a pretty decent looking rocket. And also I left it really glossy. I didn't put a top coat on it. That's just the paint by itself. But I'm pretty sure it was a gray primer, sanded multiple times, reapplied. And then I probably did a white underbase for the red. And then I did multiple coats of the red paint. So to get something like this would probably take me, depending on weather, if I worked on it every day, probably a week or two to build. A lot of that is just the time it's required to let the primer dry so that you can sand it without gumming up the sandpaper. But anyway, pretty neat to compare both rockets. Because I was glad to see that Estes did bring it back. It did have some minor changes, but all in all, it looks the same. All right, this is day 4 of my Estes de Red Max, the vintage kit I built. It's all done. I sprayed the tester's Dullcote and dries really quick. Doesn't really add any weight whatsoever, like a gloss coat does. But you could maybe see how it looks compared to the glossy finish on the left. But it looks really nice. Really dulled it up. It looks like the package, the rocket on the card insert, that dull paint. So I'm glad I went ahead and did the Dullcote. I really do like that on this rocket. I don't use it unless the plans call for it. Usually it'll be on a scale type of rocket where it calls for it. A couple of the fantasy rockets Estes designed over the years called for a Dullcote. So that's really the only time I put it on. Once again, you cannot put decals over a matte finish. It needs to be gloss coated and it needs to be smooth. Once again, the reason for sealing your fins versus just trying to put decals on a grainy balsa surface. If you do that, decals, even without a solution, will tend to suck in to any crevices. They don't really do it on the body tubes because they're very shallow, but if you had a real grainy finish, yeah, it would soak in and it would just make the decal look horrible and tougher to apply. But this is the glossy rocket that I built, the one that took me a while to build because I wanted to look really nice. I want to say just my Red Maxes have had a finish like this. I've really never done it on my other rockets, just too much work. It would take too long to build. So once again, 4 days to build, ready to fly if I want. Looks decent for an old out of the bag build, old parts, but it's fun to bring them back to life, and thank you very much for watching. Yeah, I was going to show you the rocket kits that I have built. I mean, like I said, I have a lot of, you see a Red Max, you'll probably see a couple more. It's my favorite kit, one of my favorite kits. But, I mean, you could just see how many rockets I have built. I got to start packing these up. We're going to be moving out of state here shortly. But you can see I've built a lot. I got back into the hobby in 2006 and been busy building. There's only one unfinished rocket right there. That's not mine. That's actually one I bought on eBay dirt cheap. It needs to be painted, but the construction wasn't that nice on it. Fins are crooked. Some of these Centauri kits that you see, those two right there, I think there's 3 down there. Those were actually built by one of the designers of the kits, and they were actually used in the catalog for Centauri. But all these other kits I built, they're all out of the bag. And you can see I also have there's the huge Mean Machine. That thing is big. But I have a bunch of Gillows airplanes and everything else I build. Yeah, you can see all my kits. I got more down here. Of course, my plastic kits, more rockets. So yeah, I definitely have a lot, and I got a lot more to build. That's kind of why I've kept it sitting. Look at that, another Red Max, 2 more kits. That's why I'm kind of keeping my build simple right now. How fast can I build them? Yet still make them look decent. I like them to look nice, but they're not going to be display models. As I retire here shortly, we bought some property, so should be able to fly them finally. It's kind of hard to fly in Southern California because of all the restrictions, but I do get out to the desert sometimes to get them up in the air, but not as much as I like to. That's going to be a retirement deal for me, is being out and flying whenever the weather's good enough. So, yep, that's it.